The Ways of the Lonely Ones, a collection of mystical allegories by Manly Palmer Hall. Illustrated by J. Augustus Knapp. 7th Revised Edition. Dedication. To that band of silent workers, known in this world as the Lords of Compassion and the Brothers of the Shining Robe, who labor eternally with the children of men in the name of the Great Father. This volume is dedicated by the author, that it may bear witness to the spiritual truths which they serve. Introduction. This life is not merely what it seems to be. Hidden from our eyes by the cloak of materiality is a wonderful world which only the eyes of the dreamer can see and the soul of the mystic comprehend. The stony walls of conventionalized thought and commercialized ideas shut from the view life's noble path. But as the ages pass, some see the greatness of the divine plan and comprehend the glorious destiny of the human soul. Sorrow, suffering, and loneliness are the great builders of character. Man never becomes truly great until his heart is broken. That is the supreme test. Those who are deepened and broadened by their experiences rise triumphant from the ruins of their dreams and pass on to fuller destiny. There are theories which appeal to the reason, and there are truths which the mind can never know. Through the ages, the emotion and the intellect have struggled with each other for dominion over the soul, and man has foolishly allowed his servants to become his masters. Religion is not merely intellectual, although it must be logical and reasonable. Religion, in order to unfold the spiritual nature, must be enshrined within the heart. Every individual who comes into the world is a lonely one, a stranger in a strange land. At birth, he begins a search which continues until he is laid away in death, and probably afterwards. Few can define the object they seek. If they only realized one thing, the quest would be ended. Each searches for himself. We live in a world of shadows. These phantoms are our not selves, but most of us mistake them for the real self. Only ages of sorrow and suffering can bring that discrimination which shows us what is really worthwhile and develops that determination which strengthens us for the attainment of the greatest good. Nature's Homage. With the absorbing power of quicksilver, civilization dissolves into itself the wild places of the earth. Where great forests once stood, gloomy buildings with high angular chimneys now darken narrow cobbled ways. Natural grandeur has been swallowed up in the sordidness of human construction. Here and there, however, spots may yet be found where man has not intruded, where the sound of axe, the cries of woodmen, and the rumbling of logs have not broken the primeval stillness. One by one, the savage denizens of the wild, the beasts untamed, have retreated into these scarce-trodden fastnesses before the deadly onslaught of civilization. From lonely crag and primeval wilderness, they gaze out with furtive eyes and watch the relentless advance of that dread power which would destroy their lives. In a certain land there is a majestic mountain range which lifts its towering peaks above rough and densely wooded sides, like great supplicating arms to the skies. From out the verdant luxuriance of trees and shrubs, mighty straggling monarchs of the forest toss high their branches as though to grasp their trembling fingers the clouds that hover over them. A narrow trail, barely a footpath, winds up to these mountains. Here and there it leads over loose rocks and broken boulders, or from stone to stone across some waterfall that descends like a stream of crystal from the snow-covered peaks far above. In that wood there is no silence, for there is ever a rippling, ever a swishing, ever a sighing, as from the mountain sides trickle numberless streams, or through the treetops the wind whispers its message to any listening ear. Up this narrow path climbs an occasional hunter, for the fleet-footed deer still peer shyly out of the thickets, springing from rock to rock or darting among the scrub growth that clothes the precipitous slopes on either hand. Here, too, the mountain lion lurks, and at night its shining eyes gaze out from the darkness at the campfire of the hunter. Here also the wolf and fox abound, and in the lower valleys prowls the jackal, yapping an incessant protest as the shades of evening gather. Perhaps an awkward bear crosses the path and waddles along on his short, ungainly legs. It is the paradise of the sportsman, who slays to prove the merit of his aim. Many stories are told of these mountains, many legends fashioned by the minds of ancient dreamers and perpetuated by their descendants. But strangest of all is the story of the old man of the mountain. Somewhere in the fastnesses of these hills, so the story goes, lived a hermit who had dwelt there for many years. As far back as the oldest hunters could remember, the story was told of how one, tired of the world and its shams, had crept away from the haunts of men to make his domicile among the crags of these mountains whose lofty peaks seemed to touch the sky. Once in a great while someone saw him far off in the distance as, motionless, he stood on the shore of some mountain lake or walked slowly along the brow of some barren hill silhouetted against the sky. He was known as the Old Man of the Mountain, the hermit of the mighty peaks. Some said he was good, some said he was strange and cruel, but all loved to tell of him, to indulge in the vagaries of conjecture and speculation. Once, in the course of human events, there climbed the winding, rugged mountain path a whistling youth, a strung bow in his hand and a quiver of feathered arrows and a pack upon his back. He was going into the hills to hunt. With the enthusiasm of youth, he would slay mountain lion, bear, and deer, not to mention the wolves, whose howlings he had heard from the valley below. Hours went by as the hunter persistently followed the tortuous path. The gloom of evening fell, and still he was far distant from the crest of the lofty hill, where little scrub pines appeared in the relief against the ever-present cap of snow. The chill of the mountain was in the air. The valley below was long since dark, and tiny twinkling lights revealed the abodes of men. The glow of the dying day still lingered on the mountain peak, and as the youth stood there in the twilight, he was startled by the sound of breaking twigs and swishing branches, caused by the passage of some unseen creature in the thicket. Looking quickly around, he saw standing behind him a mighty stag, whose great arched antlers had a spread of many feet, and whose noble head was raised to catch the slightest warning sound. Two large, mild eyes gazed at the youth, who, with the frenzy of the hunter, hurriedly raised his bow, aimed a barbed shaft at the heart of the stag, and with the utmost precision drew it to its head. Just as he was about to release the deadly shaft, a detaining hand was laid upon his arm. The youth started. The bow slipped from his nervous fingers, and he turned in surprise to look into the face of a strange being. As he turned, his amazement grew, for such a figure few men have seen. The face bore the marks of great age, and the snowy locks were whiter far than the mountain tops which had existed since the beginning. The figure was that of an old man, draped from head to foot in a cowl of gray cloth. In his hand he carried a great wooden staff cut from the limb of a dead tree. His eyes, however, were the wonder of the picture. Two kindly, twinkling eyes that registered even the faintest shade of emotion. One moment gleaming with the joy and life of youth, the next dimmed with the tears of sorrow, gazed into the face of the hunter. The hermit laid one hand lightly upon his shoulder, and the kindly face held only soft rebuke. You, began the youth, are you not the old man of the mountain? The stranger nodded his head, and a voice mellowed by years of goodness answered softly and kindly, Yes, I am the hermit who lives in these hills. But why do you shoot my stag? Your stag? Exclaimed the boy hunter. How comes it that you own the beast? In this world, the other answered, proper use is the sole warrant for ownership, and those who use God's creatures well have the first claim upon them. The old man held out his hand to the stag, and the beast, though viewing the hunter askance, came slowly across the little clearing and rubbed its nose against the friendly hand. Putting his arm around the neck of the stag, the hermit spoke to it in soft, musical tones. Just a few sighing sounds the old man made, but the animal seemed to understand. Its soft nose was turned upward, and its eyes looked at him with a tenderness of expression which moved even the hunter. The hermit turned to the youth. Do you still dispute my ownership? He asked. Do you still doubt that he is mine and I am his? What were the words you used? Asked the youth in surprise. How did you talk to him? I spoke in the words of the forest and the trees, he answered. That is his language. He hears the voice of fear in the crackling of the twigs and the stealthy footsteps of the hunter. He hears life and love in the voice of the waterfall and the soft swaying of leafy branches. These are the sounds of his language, and during these many years in the mountains I have learned to talk with the tongue of beast and bird. Yes, I have even learned to talk with the trees and flowers, who hear my voice and shelter me with their love and protection. Listen. The old man breathed out a soft, stirring sound like the breath of dawn in the treetops. And from the surrounding shrubs and brush came an answer, the same soft, stirring sound, and voices seemed to whisper. They all know me. They all love me. For I have lived here 80 years, and never have I injured one of God's creatures. When I want food, they bring it to me from their store. The squirrels bring me nuts from their harvest, while the trees give me of their fruit, and with their own dried leaves form a shelter which protects me in the chill of winter. You have come into these hills as the spirit of man ofttimes comes into the world, to hate and to slay. Not that you really hate. Inwardly you do not loathe the beasts, but to you their souls mean no more than a drop of water from yonder stream. But I have learned to look with love upon even the drops of water, for each one has its message. I have lived up here so long that the trees and birds and flowers are one with me in spirit. I love them all, and they truly love me. Come, young hunter, lay your bow aside for a while. For to me and to the eyes of my children of the forest, that weapon means hate and death. You need not fear. Leave it here, and I will bring you back for it anon. Laying down his bow and quiver, and taking the hand held out to him, the youth accompanied the old man into the depths of the great green forest now wrapped in evening shades. Massive trunks rose about them, and falling leaves descended like gentle rain upon them as they passed. Suddenly the old man stopped. "Look," he said. From the base of a tall tree, a big gray squirrel came and stood pertly, gazing saucily for a few seconds, then vanished like a flash of dusky shadow to reappear a second later, carrying in his mouth a ripe hazelnut. Scampering down the rough trunk, he climbed up the hermit's gray robe, and as the old man opened his mouth, the dexterous animal placed the hazelnut in it. Then, hopping upon the old man's shoulder, he sat there, his little beady eyes darting first in one direction and then in another. The hermit took the nut from his mouth and held it out to the hunter. "See how they care for me, but no more tenderly than I have cared for them." He spoke a few words to the squirrel, which darted away like some little sprite into the darkness of the gathering night. The squirrel had barely vanished when the youth suddenly jumped back in fear and amazement. Before them on the road stood a great wolf. A menacing snarl issued from the beast. "He does not know you," the old man explained. "Whenever he sees men, they throw something at him. Whenever he meets them, he expects the feathered messengers of torture and death that fly from their bows. Therefore he hates them even as they hate him. But come, you are perfectly safe." Then, stepping up to the wolf and bending slightly, he placed his hand between the beast's teeth. The animal drew back its head and licked the kindly hand. "This," continued the hermit, "has its price. If you essayed this feat, your hand would be the forfeit, and probably your life. But what have you done for the wild creatures that they should so love you?" "I have been true to them. In the cold winter nights I have sheltered their young in my little cabin. I have fed the babies that the hunters left parentless, and in the spring I have released them. Many years ago a hunter climbed these hills and slew the sire of this wolf. Another destroyed its mother, and 3 little whelps, 3 howling, fighting, spitting handfuls of flesh were left to my care. I nourished them and guarded them, and they played with my mountain lions and romped about with the bear cubs that I have in my cabin. The springtime came and they went their way, strong enough to protect themselves. This is one of them. The other 2 perhaps we shall see also, unless the hunters have slain them." They proceeded farther along the path of nature's miracles. The great stag walked behind them, his arched antlers brushing the tree branches as he passed. "Look here," the old man spoke, pointing to a crotch of a tree just a short distance ahead. "In that nest are 4 birdlings. Yesterday an arrow found its mark. There was a flutter of wings, and with a note of agony, the mother bird fell to the ground. There was a great whir of wings, and with a sharp cry of rage, the father bird flew straight into the face of the hunter. Another wicked shaft, and he too was laid low without even a fighting chance. Now hear the clamor in the tree. The old man climbed upon the broken stump, and from a fork of the dead pine he drew forth a nest, its tiny occupants with their featherless bodies and gaping beaks, crying loudly. I shall take these too with me to my cabin, and drop by drop I shall feed them as long ago I learned to do. Their mother and father are gone, slain by one of my race. But among the beasts and birds I have tried to redeem my people, and to prove to them that a generous spirit still dwells in the heart of men. His hand gently cuddled the tiny birds in their nest, and with caressing sounds he sought to quiet them. In a few moments the cries from the nest ceased, and, sheltered by the old man's love, the hungry birdlings were stilled until he could procure food. The youth marveled at the sight, for he had never supposed that among the world of men there could be one who so loved dumb creatures. The old hermit pointed to a narrow ravine that opened before them, and there the hunter saw the peaked roof of a small cabin surrounded by little fir trees and with a chimney made of old tile. Though a quaint, picturesque building of poorly matched logs, this simple structure was enthroned in the midst of a realm more beautiful than words can describe. The valley far below spread out beneath the rolling hills. Through it ran a stream, while in the background rose the peaks of the snow-capped mountains. This indeed was a home in the heart of nature. About the house could be seen a number of animals. A baby wildcat rolled in the sunlight, and an old bear lay asleep with his nose between his paws, his tail just a tiny stump that wriggled mechanically as he seemed to sense in his sleep the presence of his friend. Birds were roosting in the neighboring trees, and within a dozen feet of the dwelling were 20 birds' nests, for it seemed the creatures of the air liked to come and build their homes around the cabin door. The old man invited the youth in. They entered and sat upon the sawed-off ends of logs which served as seats. The cabin was bare of furnishings, save a rough straw pallet. Its solitary ornament was an ivory crucifix which hung upon the wall. The room was filled with birds and squirrels, and the young hunter was moved with astonishment when he saw that a small hummingbird had built its nest in the arms of the crucifix. Looking about for a stove or food, he saw no sign of either. "So this is your home?" he murmured. "This is where the old man of the mountain lives?" "Yes," the hermit answered, "and here he has lived since the day when he realized his brother man to be false and the beast to be true. In all the world of men never did I find a friend half so faithful, half so true as these wild creatures of the hills. When I look back at the sorrows of my life and tears come to my eyes, my little birds gather around me and sing their love songs into my ears. When I am tired, the great stag comes and bends his back that I may ride upon him. When I am hungry, from the mountain and caves come birds and beasts with food. I have given up the world of human affairs to serve the things which man abuses, the things to which he has been false. These birds, these little creatures that play around my door, even the wolves, the foxes and the mountain lions, they are my brothers and I their father and elder brother. I ease the wounds made by heartless hunters, and the animals know that while I live in these hills, they have one friend in the world of men who will never be untrue. All the time that I have dwelt here, I have never spoken one harsh word to either beast or bird, and they serve me with perfect faith and perfect trust. A strange emotion filled the breast of the hunter. No more will I hunt, he cried, for I have seen the life and love and light in the souls of these beasts. I also will be true to them. That is well, said the old man slowly, and he extended his hand. Brother, I am proud that you have seen the light which some day shall take from the world the karmic curse that rests upon all who slay their brothers. But night is falling in the mountains. In the air I hear the cries of the bears and lions. I hear the piteous wails of the dying, and I must go my way. So I will now take you back again to where I met you. I am an old man, and I have not much longer to stay here. But when I am gone, will you be true to the beasts whom I have loved and guarded, and who have loved me so well in return? Yes, answered the youth with vehemence. To me also the world has been an empty place, and I will fill that emptiness with the same thing which you have filled yours. If you are called, I promise that I will come and live in your little hut and go about as you do, serving the beasts. The hermit stood for a few seconds, dimly visible in his soft gray gown, while the youth, guided by the light of the waning moon, descended the winding path to the world that lay below. Part 2. 4 years passed before the youth again went up into the mountains. 4 years of sunshine and of rain. 4 years that changed the affairs of men, but left the mountains just the same, save that the tightening band of civilization has ever crowded in, closer and closer. The green grass, the lofty pines, and the wide expanse of glistening snow apparently had not changed at all. As the sun rose one morning, a strange scene confronted the eyes of the residents of those hills and valleys. Over the mountain there hung a great gray cloud with a million twisting, ever-changing convolutions. The whole atmosphere was hushed and still. A leaden silence hung over the face of nature. Hunters and trappers whispered that never before in all the years they had lived among the hills had they witnessed such an awesome sight. As the day wore on, the dark cloud deepened. A low moan broke out of the heavens, a sound that rose and fell with the passing of the wind, like the sigh of the dying. Each tree seemed to pick it up and to carry its echoes onward through leaves and branches. Every shrub and bush seemed to bow its head, while the arms of the lofty pines drooped inert in the steely light. From the rocks there issued a muffled groan. Boulders and masses of earth became thundering avalanches, while the snow upon the crest turned gray. Everything seemed to hang in suspense during nature's agitation. That day, the youth was impelled again to climb the mountain. Winding in and out along the narrow path and following intuitional guidance, he reached the point at length where the valley began and the mountain peaks parted. There among the rocks, half hidden by the overhanging darkness, stood the little cabin as he had seen it before. But now all seemed changed. He shrank back in wonderment, for out of the mountains, out of the very earth itself, out of the skies, and out of the river that flowed by the door, a great stream was coming, a stream of living creatures. Stately stags and meek-eyed does, accompanied by their young, move through the forest in silent majesty. Great lumbering bears came also, not one, but many. The air was filled with the droning of the flying birds, and even the steely light was darkened by the multitude of wings. From the forest came the wolves and foxes. In the little pool by the cabin door, varicolored fish gathered, swimming to and fro, in such numbers that the water seemed one living mass. Then it seemed that the heads of the pine trees were bowed, their branches bent low, and from the mountain tops a great cloud of leaves and fine pine needles fell like the patter of rain upon the cabin. All nature was united in a strange, sad song. The very earth itself seemed to join in the solemn dirge. With mingled wonder and fear, the youth crept to the cabin door and gazed within. There on his pallet of straw lay the still form of the old man of the mountain, his hands folded upon his breast, his white beard spread upon his cowl, his eyes closed in one last long sleep. Without entering, the youth knew the tragic truth. The hermit was dead. At the foot of the rough wooden pallet stood the great arching antlered stag, his head depressed so that his nose rested on the edge of the couch. In the hollow of the old man's arms sat the gray squirrel, trying to force a hazelnut between the cold white lips. Uttering shrill cries, little birds circled around his head, and like some menacing watchdog, the great wolf lay before the body of the one he loved. The soft scent of the forest came in through the open door, for the door of the old cabin was never closed. Baby birds in their forest nests called for the hand which could feed them no more. Tears flowed down the youth's face as he gazed. Nature's children knew they had lost their truest friend. In a world that taunted them, one alone had loved them. In a world that hated and thoughtlessly robbed them of their right to live, they had found one who understood them. And now the cold finger of death had closed his eyes, and the chilly voice of the mountain peaks had whispered in his ear. To whom could they turn now when their friend was dead? No longer would there be a sweet voice to assuage the wounds inflicted by the rude hand of the huntsman. The beasts seemed to know this, and were sad. For a few seconds the youth stood motionless, unable to take his eyes from the scene. A great something welled up in his soul, and he remembered the promise he had made, his promise to be true to these furred and feathered friends. He passed slowly through the cabin door. The great wolf looked at him but did not move. Just a low howl like a groan of desperation broke from the throat of the beast. As he touched the still form of the hermit, the squirrel raised its eyes, beady, bright eyes like sparks of fire, and two tiny paws reached out to cover the face of the master he had loved. The youth stroked the creature as in a mute gesture of protection. It stretched its own tiny body upon that of the dead. Biting his lip to check the pain of his soul, the hunter of the days gone by stepped to the door of the cabin and looked out. He started back in sheer amazement. Such a sight as met his gaze had never before confronted man, nor probably ever will again. In every direction, as far as the eye could reach, the mountains and valleys were teeming with life. It seemed as though every denizen of the wild had gathered in solemn conclave. Over the mountains, the heavy gray clouds rumbled and moaned, and lurid flashes of lightning rent the ethereal depth. With the pathos of an inconsolable grief, The rain was falling in a gentle patter upon the leaves, and the youth, looking at the form on the couch, murmured, "Indeed, blessed are the dead that the rain raineth upon." A voice within him spoke, saying, "When was such homage ever paid to a living man? When did emperor or king have such a noble cortege as this? Many noble ladies and distinguished men march in the funeral trains of the great. Many there are who come and pay respects to the nation's dead, ofttimes with indifference. But each creature that stands in this great cortege is true to the soul of its being. Here there is no sham, no pretense. Each one of these beasts in its very soul adores the one to whom it pays homage. Each of these little furred and feathered folk would gladly die for that one. Each tree and stone would give of its fleeting life the fullest and the utmost. When man has a friend among the beasts and birds, that man is good, for there is no guile in their lives, no subtleness in their adoration. Overcome, the youth sank upon his knees and gazed out at that endless stream of dumb creatures whose sorrowing eyes, lowered heads, and drooping bodies expressed the emotions of their souls. The great trees, even the blades of grass, bent their heads, for the one who had loved them all had gone forever. "This is my task," murmured the youth, "and I will fulfill it." What greater testimonial of the depth of the hermit's sincerity than that such a circle of affection should attend him? "I will return to the valley no more. I will stay and serve these beasts and birds as did the old man of the mountains." Though the shades of night fell over the mountains, they were alight that night with 1,000,000 fires upon 1,000,000 sacrificial altars, and the eyes of the silent watchers, stretching in endless rows, gleamed like coals of fire in the darkness. Next morning, when the sun rose, a new hermit was living in the mountains. Under a cross of rocks, the body of the older hermit had been laid to rest, while his spirit interceded before a greater throne for the beast that he had loved. The gray cowl was worn by another. The great staff now strengthened another's hand. So as the years sped by, in his love for nature, the one who once had slain now nursed the wounds that he had made. The birds and beasts learned to know him also, and soon they gathered around his door to whisper their secrets and confide their love. There were some who gradually forgot the friend who had gone, but loved him anew in the one he had awakened. Down in the village, none knew what had happened. They did not realize that the hermit of the pines was dead, for still his gray-cowled figure wandered among the hills. They still were wont to say, "How is it that man should be willing to live with beasts?" The old hermit had known the secret. The younger one was fast learning it. And so, as the legend says, to this day, in the heart of those hills there lives an insane old man, broken by some earthly sorrow, who has given up the benefits of human affection to live in the mountains like a beast. They laugh about him in the village, at the base of the mountains, and they lay wagers as to who shall find his bones. But at the same time they tell you of that wonderful day years ago when the mountains grew dark, and the beasts flocked together, and the great miracle took place in the hills. That story will never die. In awe, they tell you of the thunder and of the lightning, the superstitious cross themselves, and say that the Spirit of God himself walked the hills that day. They never know, nor will they ever know, that this was nature's homage, nature's only way of showing its reverence and its love for the old hermit in the gray cowl who lived in the little cabin where the valley meets the hills.